Spitfire, the official movie t-shirt, available only from Black Star Brands.
Hello and welcome to the Aviators Lounge. We're back here at the Tiger Club in Damon's Hall in Essex, and tonight I'm joined once again with Tony Dyer, and we're also joined by the author and historian Paul Beaver. Paul, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Great pleasure to be here.
Oh, good stuff. Tony, before we rack on into what we're talking with Paul, what have you been up to recently?
What have I been up to recently?
I heard you were Mustang cockpits and bits and pieces you were messing around with.
Yes, basically I've got a Mustang cockpit which I'm working on. I've got most of the fuselage and it...
Can I just stop you? How many cockpits have you got now?
About six.
About six.
Maybe
cockpits.
7. Something under 10, hopefully. But but it's got a cracking history. It's basically it was an aircraft that shot down an ME-163.
163.
And
Oh, that is unusual.
it is, yeah. And it's
A rocket fighter,
Amazing.
rather than a sort of a standard piston engine.
yeah. And if you look, there's a book on the Comet, and you can actually see the gun footage camera from the one
Your
that I've
cockpit.
got. Yeah, which is quite nice.
So when you're revealing this to us,
Oh dear, it's basically, I call it my IKEA flat pack Mustang because it sits up in the workshop, and I'm working on, for every Christmas I take a few jobs home to work on, so I'm doing the throttle box over Christmas. But it's basically very flat pack at the moment, so hopefully we'll get it going.
Well, it's a nice segue here because we're talking about piston engine aircraft shooting down, rocket powered, jet powered aircraft. Paul, back in the summer, we went down to Yeovilton to make a film, which we are now going to show.
(1952), Korea. United Nations forces had been fighting back a communist invasion for nearly 2 years. Various nations deployed their militaries. Amongst Britain's contribution was the aircraft carrier HMS Ocean. Embarked on her was the Fleet Air Arm's 802 Naval Air Squadron. On the morning of the 9th of August, a flight of Seafuries was tasked for operations. The mission was a combat reconnaissance sortie along the main railway line south of Pyongyang. One of the pilots that morning was 21-year-old Sub-Lieutenant Brian Ellis, known as Smoo.
We probably got up at about 4:30 or something in the morning. We had breakfast, we had briefing on the weather. We then got into the aircraft, tie-downs released, engine started, radio checks done, and away we went. I think we chose to go about 4,500 feet that particular day, and enjoyed the glory of the Korean sunrise. The task was to check the state of the railway between Pyongyang and Chinampo. It was a very, very pleasant trip down. No sign of much flak or interest in us, and we weaved down the river, and suddenly it all changed.
The fighter with which 802 Squadron was equipped was the Hawker Seafury, one of the fastest and most powerful piston engine fighters ever produced. What makes this single-engine fleet fighter so awesome is this engine that powers it. It's an 18-cylinder Bristol Centurus engine which develops 2,480 horsepower, pushing the aircraft along at 460 miles an hour at 15,000 feet. But it's got 2 more tricks up its sleeve. It's very sturdily built. The undercarriage in particular is very good at taking the shock of hitting an aircraft carrier deck when that aircraft carrier is pitching and rolling in a seaway. And the other trick it's got is its armament. The standard armament is 4 20mm cannon, but it can also carry 2 1,000-pound bombs or up to 8 rockets. Now this makes it ideal for tank busting or blowing bridges, and that's exactly what it was doing in Korea. By the end of the second year of the Korean War, 1952, the piston engine fighter had had its day. The Russians had started to supply the North Koreans with their latest technology, a fighter called the MiG-15. It was swept wing, it had a jet engine, and it had more than 100 miles an hour advantage over the Seafury. And what made it really, really difficult for the Seafury pilots was it had a big cannon. But maybe, just maybe, you don't want to pick a dogfight with a Seafury.
Carl Haynes saw a shadowy outline of an aircraft cross the waning moon. He saw this jet shape, swept wing shape, and he closed up. At that particular point, I suddenly realised somebody was trying to hurt me. That red tracer was going past my aircraft. And I thought, well, now is the time to call brake, so I called brake. And we did that brake and came head on to 8 MiGs. I think there were probably 2 or 3 passes like that. The MiGs were as if fairly disorganised. To my absolute surprise, an aircraft popped up from behind me, a MiG, overtaking me with his air brakes out. And almost instantly I realised I was getting closer to him because the air brakes had slowed him right up. And I thought, well, here's a chance to do exactly as I'd been taught, to actually fire an aircraft from the quarter behind him. And I did, and I hit him. I wish I could say something dramatic happened, but all I could see is I hit him. No great chunks flew off, nothing burst into flame. And that was it. Almost instantly after that, they all started disappearing. About half a minute after this thing got in front of me, an aircraft was seen to blow up. It didn't even occur to me that it was one I was firing at. By this time, all the MiGs had totally disappeared, and it began to sink in that possibly we'd shot down a jet aircraft. And we decided to hightail it and go back to the ship.
Paul, what a great story. That's fantastic. And so basically, you've got an aircraft which is out on paper, is outperformed, actually manages in this dogfight to get round.
Absolutely right. I mean, if you look at it on paper, the jet is faster, it's got a much better gun system, and just one of those shells could have taken out the Seafury. The difference is you have pilots, might only be 21 years old, but pilots trained to the very highest standards. The Fleet Air Arm has a particular reputation for training fighter pilots. And you had people at the top of the game, and Brian will tell you that they practiced every day doing the scissors. You know, you see an aircraft, you go into you're in finger 4, and you go into that maneuver, which allows you to double back and get behind the enemy.
So take me through that again. So finger 4, so there's 4 aircraft flying alongside each other, and you say you go into the scissors. So talk me through that.
So the finger 4 is something that the Germans came up with, and actually the Poles came up with as well. Before we did, we were very good in the Battle of Britain at flying in Vic formations and being shot down. This is something that the Fleet Air Arm didn't really approve of. So you have a finger 4, you have the lead, you have the number 2, and their wingman. And you're in combat formation, so you're spread over about 1.5 miles to 2 miles. So you've got plenty of room to see. When you see the enemy, the young pilot who saw the enemy first was known for having the best eyes in the fleet. He had fantastic vision, saw the aircraft, and in jet aviation, you're traveling you're pretty fast. They would have been traveling at nearly 500 miles an hour, so they're really moving. And you don't have a lot of time to maneuver. So it's a split-second thing. The guy who spots the aircraft calls the brake. It happened to be Brian who was closest. He saw the aircraft after they'd been identified and called the brake. So he was flying number 4. So what they did was they did a scissor. So the scissor allows you to fly round each other to get behind enemy that wants to get behind you. Because the old adage, it's Cecil Lewis and Sagittarius rising, you get behind the enemy to shoot them down. The mistake that the Chinese pilot, we think it was Chinese because of intelligence reports afterwards made, was that he thought he could tangle with the Seafury. Well, the Seafury can outturn him. He can so it's like Phantom versus MiG in the Vietnam War. The Phantom never tangled with the MiG. The Phantom will either go up or out at Mach 2 and come back in missile strike. So it's the same here. You don't want to tangle with a propeller aircraft if you're in a jet. So what happens, and Brian describes it so well, the first time, by the way, he's given that in 63 years, given that explanation to Aviators Lounge. It's all about getting into that position. And he didn't actually have to do it because the rookie Chinese pilot got in the way. And then he's got 20mm cannon. Yeah. He used all his ammunition on that aircraft. So it was not going to fly for much longer after that.
No, well, you can, obviously, jets have a higher speed, closing speed and things like that. So you can imagine that.
You can use that to your advantage.
Yeah.
But you can't outmaneuver.
No.
And that's the key.
Yeah.
I have to say, the Chinese with their Russian instructor learned very quickly because the next day they were back, they almost jumped the same formation. And the Brits had to, Fleet Aram guys had to hide in cloud because they'd learned quickly. So, this was a one-off opportunity. What I think is amazing about it, so I was saying Brian spoke about it for the first time. This is something that in 1978, I interviewed everybody involved. I interviewed the 4 pilots in the flight. I interviewed the armaments officer and the air engineering officer from the ship, from 802 Squadron, and got the story because traditionally the flight leader, Hoagie Carmichael, is credited with the kill.
That's great. Now, Brian went on to talk about this, and we've got that clip. So what I'll show you now is show you the next bit of the film.
It was on the way back to the ship. I have to say this, that I noticed Hoagie decided to, what he called, check his guns. And he peeled off. We had a little tiny series of little small patches of sand just outside off the coast, which we used to, quite often went down and fired guns to see the pattern of the shot. And he fired quite a number of shots down into this particular patch, and I didn't think anything of it at the time. And we went back to the ship, landed on. Everybody was euphoric, and it was decided that we had shot a MiG down. And it was further decided that Hoagie had done it. I can't work out why exactly. He was the senior one there, and why shouldn't he? Nobody else. I wasn't making any wild claims, and I'm just glad that we'd all sort of got away with it. The ultimate thing that decided me that maybe we should share the kill was the fact when I checked with Tony Cross, Baron Cross, who was sort of armaments officer, pilot as well. He wanted to know what settings we had on our gyro gun sight. I was a bit horrified. I looked at mine, and mine was set to RP, which is 45 feet. But that's close enough for a MiG, really. What is a MiG, 38 feet or something like that? And he then checked the consumption of our ammunition. In my case, I hadn't any left at all. I'd completely used all my ammunition. But Hoagie had 90%, which has always stuck in my mind from that point of view. And I think possibly the only ones he ever loosed off were into that sandbank. Yeah. That's the way it worked. That's how we got our meat that particular day in August.
Wow.
So it's 32 rounds that Hoagie fired at the sandbag, and that was it.
What a revelation. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because the doctrine at the time was that the flight leader, being the senior officer, would get any credit. So Hoagie Carmichael gets the Distinguished Service Cross. Now that's the equivalent of the military cross in the army, for example. That's a high decoration. To get it, and people at Winkle Brown got Distinguished Service Cross.
Yeah.
You know, that's the calibre that we're talking about here. All of them agreed with me in 1978 that I wouldn't write the story until there was one left, and that was 2 years ago. I wrote it for the Times newspaper, and it was Brian was the last one. So obviously I checked. Gentleman's agreement. Shows you I'm not a real journalist, I'm an historian. And we agreed this is what we do. And I had a bit of pushback from the Fleet Air Arm saying, well, you can't really rock the boat. I mean, you know, this is... And I said, no, we've got to do this. The story went out. As we thought everyone had gone, I mean, Jack Button, for example, Air Engineering Officer, had passed away 10 years ago. You know, we didn't think there was anybody else left. Hoagie died in the 90s. And it was really interesting because Brian got, about a week later, an email from Canada, from Carl Haynes, I think he was number 3 in the formation, saying, just seen the Times newspaper, really glad that's out, exactly what happened, as it says in there, well done, that's brilliant, you know, I concur. Now that to me as an historian is I've got 2 primary sources agreeing on the story. So as far as I'm concerned, Smoo, as he's known in the Navy, he gets the kill for this. He won't get the medal, I'm afraid. The system doesn't do that. But what a great thing to be able to set the record straight.
So in the 70s, did you interview Hoagie then? And did he say...
He was incredibly... so I've got the my notebook still from that time. I was writing a book. It's actually my first book that I was writing about the Fleet Air Arm. And I was, of course, a very, very young author, I have to say. I was only 3 at the time when I was writing this.
I wasn't born.
But the way he said it was, well, there was perhaps some doubt in it. And I said, well, you know, I've got everybody else's comment. He went, yes. And I said, but they've all agreed that it won't go out until there's only one of you left. And he went, oh, that's fine. But Brian will tell you that he had a conversation with Hoagie where Hoagie sort of apologised. And it's a difficult thing, isn't it? I mean, this is Hoagie's last flight. He's posted off the ship. These things don't happen instantly. You know, the captain doesn't run out with a tray of medals. So it takes a while, by which time everyone's dispersed, and we're British. We don't rock the boat. And you know, Smoo is a delightfully self-effacing character.
I love the way you referred, even at the end of that, so that's how we got our MiG. It referred to it, didn't say my MiG.
Well, I think we should look at that Distinguished Service Cross as a medal which represents all of the people, because you often find that in warfare. You know, the platoon commander, the ship's captain gets recognised, but actually it's the platoon and the ship's company that all are part of this. And
it's a team effort, isn't it?
It's a team effort.
Even down to the armourer.
Yes, everything, everybody. You know, the engineers, the guys, the ratings who are preparing the aircraft. I mean, you've got some brilliant footage there of HMS Ocean. That is 802 Squadron on the ship. What's really interesting that I found out that I haven't seen anywhere else is those Korean recognition markings, the black and white markings, were taken off the aircraft that night because the intelligence reports of listening to the radios of the MiG pilots, they said these aircraft are really easy to see because they've got black and white markings. So after that, the photographs of Smoo's aircraft are taken after that event show it without any markings on, because they took them off. They thought, well, you know, we'll risk the American anti-aircraft gunners.
So we've got one last clip here, Paul. So when we were down there at Yeovilton back in the summer, we also got the chance to put Brian in the back of one of the Seafuries down there with Navy Wings, who we must give a big thank you to for facilitating this. And we'll put some details up about how to support Navy Wings. Can you just talk us through this? So this is Brian. It's only about a minute or so long, but this is Brian going out to the aircraft, and we're going to do the engine test. So
he's going out with one of the Seafury pilots here. This is the two-seat aircraft, which they did quite a bit of flying in the two-seat aircraft, but it isn't configured in the same way as the FB-11.
It's so big, isn't it? When you look at that as an aircraft, a piston engine aircraft.
It's a typical Sydney CAM design, isn't it? Yeah. You can see the lineage that goes hurricane, typhoon, tempest.
Even goes as far as the Hunter.
And you can, but just look at the undercarriage. That undercarriage, that looks just like a Hunter's undercarriage, or a steel, whatever. Yeah. But I have to say, it's the first time that Brian had been in one of those aircraft.
Right.
For 60-something years.
Wow.
And the other thing we did for him was we took him to see a MiG-15. Right. And he just stood there for 30 seconds looking at the cannon and went, I was really lucky.
Yeah.
But of course, the great thing about naval aircraft is you have to fold the wings.
Yes. Yeah.
And to get it down into the aircraft lift. And this is Brian, having a bit of fun after 60-something years. And what Navy Wings did for us as well, which was really nice, they brought out the single-seat aircraft as well.
What sort of memories
if you ask me?
Back to you?
Quite vivid. I don't have much time in trainers, so slightly unusual sitting in the back seat at such a high angle, looking forward. But the sounds, the procedures are still there.
Hadn't changed in 65 years. And were you looking for that man on the flight deck officer, or to be doing that, and launch you? Did you?
I'd like to say yes, but I wasn't.
Great. Oh, Paul, that.
Such a great guy. I mean, Brian is just very typical of his generation. No razzmatazz, no. I'm a fighter pilot stuff. It's just a quiet, simple. Well, I did my job.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Paul, that was absolutely fantastic taking us through all that, and it was a pleasure to do the film with you. How do we look up what you're doing and what you're up to? You're on Twitter, aren't you?
I am indeed. I'm at Beaver_Paul.
Great.
I'm pretty, I've already tweeted about us being here, actually.
Good stuff.
So,
yes. You're a
so
prolific
get that out. Yeah.
Yes,
so,
excellent.
and I've just finished Winkle Brown's biography.
Yep.
New projects underway. So I'm still enjoying. I'm enjoying the history piece, and telling stories that need to be told, and sometimes just tweaking the history so we get the true story and not the perceived one.
Well, after how many years was it? 60 odd years. Brian's got his mic.
We have indeed. Yes, indeed.
Thanks. Well, that's about it for now. I hope you enjoyed the show. It's a good one this evening. Do like and share and comment on all our stuff that we put up. Please subscribe to this channel. The button should be underneath us somewhere. And if you've got any information or any stories or anything you want to get hold of us about, please do contact us via social media. That's it. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.
Spitfire, the official movie t-shirt, available only from Black Star Brands.